The morning began too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, the kind that follows destruction. Maria Alvarez stood in the grand marble foyer of the Devereaux mansion, her hands trembling as she folded the last of her uniforms into a faded canvas bag. The sound of the zipper seemed to echo through the empty hall like a verdict being sealed. Outside, the first light of dawn spilled through the high windows, touching the gold frames of portraits that watched her like silent judges. Two security guards waited near the door, motionless. Beside them stood Mr. Cole, the butler, thin, severe, his gloved hands folded neatly in front of him. He'd worked in this house longer than anyone, but today his eyes carried no warmth. "Mr. Devereaux will not speak with you further," he said coldly. "The decision has been made." Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, Mr. Cole, I didn't take anything. You know me. You've known me since before." He cut her off. "There's surveillance footage. You were seen leaving the jewelry room the same night the bracelet disappeared." Her breath caught. "I was cleaning the hallway. I never went inside." "Enough," he replied sharply, like a door slamming shut. The word bracelet twisted in her chest. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It had belonged to Mrs. Devereaux, the late wife of the billionaire who owned the estate. Maria remembered polishing it once, long ago, when the lady of the house was still alive, a delicate band of diamonds that glittered like captured starlight. To be accused of stealing it felt like being accused of stealing the woman's memory itself. Footsteps echoed across the marble. Everyone straightened as Edward Devereaux appeared at the top of the staircase. He was still in his morning robe, the collar stiff and perfect, but there was nothing soft in his face. His silver hair caught the light like ice. He looked down at Maria with the calm cruelty of a man who believed money could never be wrong. "I trusted you," he said, voice low but sharp. "You had access to everything in this house, and this is how you repay me." Maria shook her head quickly, words catching on her tongue. "Sir, please, someone is setting me up. I would never—" "You'll be escorted out immediately," he interrupted. "And if the bracelet isn't returned by noon, I'll have the police involved. You may go." He turned to leave, but Maria's voice broke through the silence. "Mr. Devereaux, my daughter, Lucia, her tuition depends on this job. Please, I've given this house 10 years of my life." He stopped mid-step but didn't look back. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "you should have valued it more." And he was gone. Maria's knees nearly gave out. 10 years of loyalty, erased in 10 seconds. The guards moved closer. Mr. Cole gestured to the door. "You have 5 minutes." She nodded weakly and lifted the canvas bag, her throat burning as she turned toward the exit. But as she did, something flickered at the edge of her vision, movement on the upper landing. A small shape, half hidden behind the railing. Ethan, 9 years old, barefoot, wearing a wrinkled shirt and pajama pants. His hair was tousled, his eyes wide and wet with confusion. He gripped the railing with both hands, watching everything in silence. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, Maria forgot her shame. She'd helped raise that boy since he was a baby, read to him at night when his mother was too sick to leave her bed, held him the day she passed, promised him that the world could still be kind. Now he was seeing her leave in disgrace. She forced a trembling smile. "Go back to bed, Ethan," she whispered. "It's all right." But he didn't move. He just whispered back, barely audible. "Why are they lying?" Mr. Cole snapped his fingers sharply. "Young master, back to your room." Ethan flinched, then darted away, his small footsteps vanishing down the hall. Maria's heart cracked open. "They're lying." The words stayed in her chest long after he disappeared. She took one last look around the foyer. Every inch of the place was familiar. The smell of polished wood, the echo of distant clocks, the faint hum of the chandeliers. It had been her world for a decade, and now it rejected her like a body expelling a foreign object. Outside, dawn had fully broken. The air was cold and heavy with mist. She stepped down the marble steps slowly, gripping the strap of her bag as if it were her only lifeline. At the iron gates, a delivery truck rumbled past, splashing through puddles left from last night's rain. She stopped for a moment, staring back at the mansion, the glass windows shining like blind eyes. Inside that house, a powerful man had just erased her name from his records. But somewhere in one of those rooms, a small boy still believed her. And though Maria didn't know it yet, that boy, Ethan Devereaux, was about to find something that would change both of their lives forever. The mansion had never felt so large, not because it had grown, but because silence had swallowed every corner of it. After Maria's departure, the Devereaux house seemed to breathe differently, slower, colder, emptier. The staff moved like shadows, their footsteps careful, their conversations reduced to murmurs that dissolved before they reached the marble walls. Even the clocks, once synchronized to chime together at the top of every hour, now ticked unevenly, as if time itself had stopped agreeing with the man who owned it. Edward Devereaux worked longer hours than usual. He'd begin before dawn, pacing between his study and the library, the glow of his laptop screen painting harsh light across his tired face. He buried himself in numbers and emails, anything that kept his mind away from the boy down the hall and the echo of a woman's voice that sometimes drifted through memory, his late wife, Eleanor. She had been the soul of this house, the laughter, the softness, the reason light had once felt welcome here. And ever since her accident, that warmth had died quietly, first in the chandeliers, then in the piano room, then in Edward's heart. Now the house was nothing but marble and money, flawless and lifeless. That morning, Ethan sat at the enormous breakfast table, staring at a bowl of untouched cereal that had gone soggy in the milk. Across from him, two maids whispered while setting the silverware. Neither of them looked him in the eye. "Eat, Master Ethan," one of them said softly. "Your father wants you at the tutor's desk by 8. He didn't answer. His spoon clinked once, then fell. He couldn't stop thinking about Maria, her gentle voice, the way she used to hum while dusting the picture frames, or how she'd always slip him an extra cookie when his father wasn't looking. Last night, he'd dreamed that she was still here, folding napkins into birds the way she used to do to make him laugh. In the dream, he'd run into her arms and said, "They're wrong, Miss Maria. I know you didn't do it." But when he woke, all that was left was silence and the faint smell of her perfume fading from the hall. He pushed the bowl away and whispered to himself, "She didn't steal anything." From the far end of the dining room, Mr. Cole cleared his throat, a warning sound that had replaced the need for words. "Your father asked that you not speak during breakfast, young sir." Ethan didn't even look up. "Then maybe he should come have breakfast first." The butler's jaw tightened. "Mind your tone," but Ethan was already sliding off his chair, muttering, "I'm done." He didn't go to the study. He didn't open his school books. He went to Maria's old room instead. The door was locked now, stripped bare, the brass nameplate already removed. But Ethan knew another way in. He'd seen the housekeeper open it once with a spare key hidden inside a vase on the third-floor landing. The key turned with a soft click. The air inside still carried her scent, lavender and soap. Her small framed photos were gone, her blankets folded, her uniform aprons stacked neatly on the chair. But one thing remained. On the wall, near the dresser, hung a single piece of paper. A child's drawing. It showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, standing under a big yellow sun. He'd made it when he was 6. At the bottom, written in his messy, uneven handwriting, "Me and Miss Maria, my second mom." His throat tightened. He reached up, tracing the crayon lines with his fingertip. The wax had faded over time, but the memory hadn't. He remembered that day, when his mother was sick, too weak to leave her bed. Maria had sat with him in the kitchen, drawing with him until his tears stopped. She was the only one who ever said, "You're allowed to cry, Ethan. Even strong people cry." He blinked quickly, forcing the sting in his eyes away. "I miss you," he whispered. Outside the window, rain began to fall, soft and steady, drumming against the glass like fingers tapping out a secret. That afternoon, Edward passed through the hallway and caught sight of Ethan coming out of the locked staff corridor. "Where have you been?" His voice carried the weight of command. "Nowhere," Ethan said, eyes downcast. "Your tutor says you skipped arithmetic again." "I wasn't in the mood," Edward sighed impatiently. "You're never in the mood lately. What's gotten into you?" Ethan looked up at him then, really looked at him. "You fired her." The air between them thickened. "She stole from this family," Edward said flatly. "That's what's gotten into me." "She didn't steal," Ethan snapped, surprising even himself with the sharpness of his tone. "You didn't even listen to her." Edward's expression hardened. "You will not speak to me that way." "Then maybe you should stop speaking to everyone else that way," the boy muttered, and stormed down the hall before his father could respond. Later that night, when the house had gone dark and quiet again, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the muffled echoes of his father's phone calls from the study below. Yes, keep the records locked until after the audit. I don't want any delays. He didn't understand everything, but he caught one word: records. That was the same word Maria used once when she told him grown-ups kept the truth hidden inside paper. He turned on his side, staring at the faint glow under his door, and whispered, "If no one's going to find it, maybe I should." In that moment, something changed in him. The small, quiet boy who once hid behind stair railings decided he wasn't going to hide anymore. Because somewhere in this cold, echoing mansion, the truth about Miss Maria was waiting, and he was the only one brave enough to find it. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It clung to the windows of the Devereaux mansion like it was trying to wash something away. But nothing could clean what was already dirty inside those walls. Ethan spent most of his time wandering the house alone now. His father was buried in conference calls, and the staff avoided eye contact as if he carried a disease called truth. He noticed things no one thought he could: the whispers, the glances, the way Mr. Cole's voice dropped to a hush whenever the word audit came up. It began one afternoon when Ethan hid behind the tall grandfather clock in the hallway. He wasn't supposed to be there. No one ever lingered near the study when his father worked, but he'd dropped his marble earlier and followed its roll across the tiles. That's when he heard it. 2 voices behind the half-open study door. Cole and Ms. Lang, the house accountant. Cole hissed quietly, "The audit's been moved up. If those files surface, we're finished." Lang's voice trembled. "Mr. Devereaux said to destroy them after the inspection." "And if the insurance board asks about the Alvarez file?" There was a pause, a silence that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Say it never existed." The boy froze. Alvarez. He didn't know much about audits or insurance, but he knew that name. Maria. His heart thudded in his chest so loud he thought they might hear it. He pressed his palms against the wood, holding his breath until the footsteps faded away. When he finally ran back to his room, he didn't stop until he was under the blanket, whispering to himself, "They're lying about her." Again. That night, the storm grew heavier. Thunder shook the glass walls of the sunroom, lightning flickered across the marble floors, and still, the mansion felt lonelier than the weather outside. Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the whispered words: files, destroy, Alvarez. He got up, grabbed his flashlight, and tiptoed down the corridor in his socks. The study door was closed now, locked. He stood in front of it for a long moment, listening. Nothing but the distant hum of rain. He crouched and peered through the narrow crack under the door. Faint light from the fireplace glowed across the carpet. Papers were spread out on the desk, half buried under a crystal paperweight shaped like an eagle. And right there, next to the lamp, he saw something small but unmistakable, a brown folder stamped with a faded label. Staff claims, confidential. The name burned into his mind. He wanted to grab it, open it, see what they were hiding. But he was only 9. And he was scared. He backed away quietly, heart pounding, whispering, "Tomorrow, when they're gone." By morning, his father had already left for the company headquarters downtown. Cole was in charge again, pacing through the hallways with a clipboard, barking orders like a soldier preparing for war. "Ms. Lang," Cole snapped near the stairs, "I want the financial ledgers boxed before noon, and the rest of those reports? Burn them if you must." Ethan froze halfway down the staircase. Burn them. He waited until Cole disappeared into the basement before rushing to the study again. This time, the door wasn't locked. He slipped inside quietly, his breath fogging the cold air. The room smelled like cedar and cigar smoke. The shelves towered around him, lined with legal binders and dusty trophies, the monuments of a man who loved order but built it on secrets. He climbed onto the leather chair, his knees sinking into the cushion. The folder was still there, under the eagle paperweight. His small hands hesitated, then lifted it. Inside were typed forms with names he didn't recognize, all stamped settled or denied. He flipped through page after page until one name stopped him cold. Alvarez Miguel, construction foreman. The line beneath it read, "Claim dismissed, non-occupational injury, no compensation approved." Miguel Alvarez, Maria's husband. Ethan remembered her once telling him, "My husband worked for your father. He was a good man. He died working on something your family built." She'd smiled softly then, as if forcing hope into a space where pain still lived. And now the truth was sitting right there in his lap, a paper saying his death didn't even count. He felt his stomach twist. He turned to the back of the file and saw more notes: insurance policies, signatures, and a handwritten annotation, subject to review, pending suppression. Another note in different ink scrawled angrily across the margin: "Do not reopen, ED." He didn't need to guess who that was. He sat frozen for a moment, rain tapping against the window behind him. Then a soft voice made him jump. "Ethan?" It was Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper, elderly, kind-faced, holding a tray of folded towels. She frowned when she saw him at the desk. "What are you doing in here, sweetheart?" He hid the file behind his back quickly. "I was just looking for my marble." She gave a tired smile. "Well, don't let your father catch you rummaging through his things. You know how he gets." He nodded. She left. Ethan waited until the sound of her footsteps faded, then slipped the folder into his backpack. He zipped it tight, whispering under his breath, "I'll give it back to her. I'll make it right." That night, he sat by his bedroom window, the folder hidden under his pillow. The storm outside had passed, but inside the house, a different one was building, one made of lies, silence, and a boy's determination to find the truth. He didn't know how yet. He didn't even know what the word staff claim meant, but he knew one thing for sure. If Maria Alvarez had been framed, this file would prove it. And tomorrow, he'd find a way to reach her. Because sometimes, even a child knows when the grown-ups are lying. And when they do, that truth becomes heavier than any secret they try to hide. The apartment was barely big enough for her and her grief. Maria Alvarez sat on the edge of her twin bed, staring at the folded uniform that no longer belonged to her. The navy blue fabric still smelled faintly of lemon polish and garden roses, the scent of the Devereaux mansion. She pressed it to her chest like something sacred, even though it now represented everything she'd lost. The rain that had haunted the coast for days had followed her here. It leaked through a crack in the window frame, dripping rhythmically into an old pot she'd placed underneath. She was too tired to fix it, too tired to cry again. Her phone buzzed for the third time that morning. Another call from a number she didn't recognize. She ignored it. She already knew what it was. Another employer who'd just realized her name came up flagged in a private database. Word had spread fast. "Termination under suspicion of theft," she murmured bitterly. "That's what they'll remember about me." Her hands shook as she reached for the small framed photo on the nightstand. Her husband, Miguel, in his dusty construction helmet, smiling at the camera with a cigarette hanging from his lips. The picture was 10 years old, the edges worn, the glass cracked. She touched the photo gently. "They took your life," she whispered, "and now they've taken mine." The kettle whistled in the kitchen. She got up slowly, poured hot water into a chipped mug, and dropped in a tea bag. The apartment was silent except for the hum of an old refrigerator. On the small table sat Lucia, her 11-year-old daughter, hair tied in a messy braid, hunched over her homework. "Mom," Lucia said without looking up, "are you going back to work next week?" Maria froze. The question stabbed like a knife she couldn't see coming. She forced a soft smile. "Maybe. I'm taking a little break right now." Lucia nodded, her pencil scratching across the paper. "Can we still go to school next term? Miss Lillian said tuition's due soon." The mug trembled in Maria's hand. "We'll figure something out, sweetheart." "Did you do something wrong at your job?" Lucia asked quietly. Maria looked up sharply. "Who told you that?" "No one," the girl said quickly. "I just heard Mrs. Parker from next door say the Devereaux people are cutting off the thief's kid." Maria's throat went dry. She set the mug down slowly, staring at the rising steam. "Don't listen to what other people say," she said softly. "They don't know the truth." Lucia hesitated. "So what is the truth, Mama?" Maria turned her face away, blinking back tears. "That sometimes good people get punished because bad people have more power." That night, Maria sat by the window long after Lucia fell asleep. Streetlights painted thin orange stripes across her face. Her mind replayed every second of that morning: the cold marble floors, Mr. Cole's voice, Edward's dismissal, Ethan's eyes on the staircase. They're lying. She could still hear the boy's whisper echoing in her head, the only voice in that entire house that had sounded human. She sighed heavily, resting her forehead against the cold glass. God, if there's even a bit of truth left in that house, let it find me. The next morning, she received an email, unsigned, from an encrypted address. No subject line, no message body, just one attachment, a single photo. Her heart stopped when she opened it. It was a blurry image of a document, a page from a file stamped staff claims, confidential. In the middle of the page was Miguel's name. Next to it, claim dismissed, compensation withheld. Her breath caught. What? How? She whispered. She scrolled down and saw a second line, typed faintly but visible. Alvarez family. Suppression order signed by E.D. Edward Devereaux. The room spun. Her trembling hands clutched the phone as she read it again and again, her pulse thundering in her ears. Then, beneath the image, a single sentence appeared, a message sent seconds later. Miss Maria, don't be mad. I found this. E. She froze. E. She didn't need to guess. There was only one E who'd call her Miss Maria. Ethan. Her fingers shook as she typed back. Ethan, sweetheart, how did you get this? Where are you? 3 dots blinked. Then his reply appeared. At home. I saw it in Dad's office. He lied about you, about your husband too. I wanted you to know. Maria's chest tightened. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain this time, but something closer to hope. She typed quickly. Listen to me, Ethan. You mustn't go near those files again. Promise me. But you didn't steal anything, he wrote back. I can prove it. There are more papers. No, she sent, panicking. Please, you could get in trouble. He didn't reply. The dots vanished. Maria pressed a shaking hand over her mouth, whispering, Oh, God, no. The boy was trying to help, but in a house like that, truth was dangerous. She spent the rest of the morning pacing the small apartment, torn between fear and fury. Every instinct screamed to run, to protect her daughter, to forget the mansion, to leave that cursed family behind. But another voice whispered something else. If you stay silent, they win again. Maria stopped by the window, looking out over the gray city skyline. Somewhere behind those clouds was a boy, risking everything for her. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. They erased me, she whispered, but they won't erase him. That evening, she pulled a shoebox from under her bed. Old documents, payslips, photos, fragments of her past life. She began sorting through them, laying each paper across the table like evidence waiting for a trial. Lucia stirred in her sleep as Maria whispered softly to herself, If they want silence, I'll give them truth instead. And miles away, in the mansion where rain still tapped the windows, a small boy sat on his bed with the same thought echoing inside his chest. They were connected now. The maid they erased and the boy who remembered her. And the file he'd found was only the beginning. The storm had passed, but inside the Devereaux mansion, the air still felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. It was past midnight. Every light except one had been turned off. The only glow came from under the door of Edward Devereaux's private office, a place no one entered without permission, except for one small boy who could no longer sleep. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, gripping his flashlight in one hand and the edge of his blanket in the other. His father's voice from earlier that evening still rang in his ears. You will not mention Maria Alvarez again. That chapter is closed. But Ethan couldn't close it, not after the file, the whispers, and the photo he'd secretly sent her that morning. He'd watched the message go through, heart racing. He hadn't told anyone, not even Mrs. Crane. But ever since, he'd had the feeling that someone in the house knew. Cole had been hovering around more than usual, watching, asking strange questions like, Did you see anyone near the study? Ethan knew he had to act before the truth disappeared, like everything else in this house eventually did. He waited until he was sure everyone was asleep. Then he slipped out of bed, pulled on his hoodie, and padded barefoot down the dark hallway. The floorboards creaked under his small weight. He froze at every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the clicking of the security camera. But he'd mapped the blind spots weeks ago. He knew where to stand, when to move, when to hold his breath. He reached the study door. The brass handle gleamed faintly in the moonlight. He tried it, locked. But Ethan had been watching his father long enough to know he always kept a spare key nearby, not in a drawer, not in a safe, in something sentimental, his mother's piano. She had once told him, Your father hides the things he doesn't want to face. And after she died, he locked the piano room. Ethan crept toward the music hall. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. The grand piano stood in the center, covered with a silk sheet that shimmered faintly in the dark. He remembered the key, his mother's secret. She'd once shown him that the back leg of the piano had a small wooden plug that could be pried open. Inside it, she used to hide his birthday letters so his father wouldn't find them early. He knelt and ran his fingers along the smooth leg, feeling for the seam. There, a tiny groove. He pushed it open with a pencil. Something clicked. Inside was a small brass key. Cold, perfect. He closed the compartment and whispered, "Thanks, Mom." The key turned smoothly in the study door. The lock gave way with a faint metallic sigh. Inside, the air smelled like cedar, ink, and secrets. The room was lined with heavy shelves, stacks of ledgers, framed certificates. A large portrait of his father and mother hung above the fireplace, their smiles painted but distant. Ethan stepped inside, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. He moved toward the desk. Papers were spread everywhere, ledgers, financial reports, envelopes stamped private, but one drawer caught his eye. It wasn't like the others, smaller, tucked to the side, almost invisible beneath the rest. He tried it, locked. He pulled gently. Nothing. Then he noticed faint scratches near the lock. Someone had opened it before, often, maybe Cole. He took a deep breath and used the brass key again. It didn't fit perfectly, but it turned halfway, enough to loosen the latch. The drawer slid open an inch. He froze. Inside were files, thick, neatly stacked, bound with red ribbons, each labeled with names, workers. He lifted the top one. The name nearly glowed in the beam of his flashlight. Alvarez Miguel. Case, fatal worksite incident. His heart raced. He opened it. There were photos. The construction site, scaffolding collapsed, dust, blood on gravel. A report stamped confidential, typed notes describing structural negligence. But the next paragraph was blacked out with thick permanent ink. At the bottom, a note in handwriting, unmistakably his father's. Compensation suspended, public exposure risk, close case permanently. Ethan's breath caught. He turned the next page, another name, then another. Dozens of workers, all denied, settled, or suppressed. He didn't understand every word, but he understood enough. His father hadn't just fired Maria unfairly. He'd erased her husband's life, buried it under paperwork. His flashlight trembled. He closed the folder and whispered, "How could you?" A faint sound from behind made him jump. Footsteps in the hall. He turned off the flashlight, heart hammering. The door creaked slightly as a shadow passed by. Long, tall, unmistakably Cole's. Ethan pressed himself against the side of the desk, holding his breath. Cole stopped outside, muttering, "Thought I heard something." The doorknob rattled. Ethan's eyes widened. Then the butler sighed and walked away. The boy waited 30 seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Then exhaled shakily. He couldn't stay. He grabbed the Alvarez file, slid it into his backpack, and shut the drawer as quietly as he could. Before leaving, something caught his eye. A small leather notebook under the lamp. The initials on the cover, E.D. He opened it just long enough to see one. Lines scrawled across a page in his father's sharp handwriting. "Eleanor warned me once that guilt doesn't fade, it festers." His mother's name. He closed the book, lips trembling. Maybe she was right, he whispered, and slipped out. When he returned to his room, the rain had started again, soft, persistent, like the world was whispering secrets of its own. Ethan hid the file under his bed, then crawled beneath his blanket, clutching the flashlight to his chest. His pulse was still racing, but his fear had changed shape. It wasn't the dark he was afraid of anymore. It was what he'd just brought into the light. The next morning, the world seemed quieter, but not calmer. Ethan sat at the long breakfast table, staring at his father's untouched coffee cup. The storm outside had left streaks of water across the glass walls, and sunlight flickered through them like broken reflections. He barely ate. Every sound made him flinch. The hum of the refrigerator, the clink of a spoon, the creak of a floorboard behind him. He'd hidden the file under a loose panel in his closet floor. He checked it twice that morning before school, whispering to himself, "It's safe. She'll know the truth soon." He just didn't know how to reach her. Until he remembered her number, Maria had once written it down for him on a sticky note when his tutor forgot to pick him up from lessons. He'd memorized it without realizing why. Now it floated in his head like a secret password. He waited until Cole left for the errands and his father disappeared into another conference call. Then he ran to his room, closed the door, and grabbed his tablet. His hands trembled as he typed the number into a voice app. The ringtone buzzed softly through the speaker. Once, twice, 3 times. Hello? Her voice. Soft. Familiar. The same voice that used to tell him bedtime stories about angels that guard children who speak truth. Miss Maria? He whispered. There was silence on the other end. Then a gasp. Ethan. He smiled for the first time in days. Yeah, it's me. Sweetheart, oh my God, are you all right? You shouldn't be calling me. I had to, he interrupted. I found something. About you. About Mr. Alvarez. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? He lowered his voice. There's a file in Dad's office. It says he stopped the payment for your husband's accident. It says he signed it. There was a sharp inhale, followed by quiet trembling on the line. Ethan, listen to me, she said carefully, her voice breaking between calm and panic. You mustn't tell anyone you saw that. Not Mr. Cole, not your father. Promise me. But it's wrong, he whispered fiercely. He lied about you. He lied about everything. I know, she said softly. But sometimes, proving, the truth can be dangerous. You're just a child, Ethan. I'm not a baby anymore, he said quickly. You always told me strong people speak up. I told you that when you scraped your knee, she said, a sad smile behind her words. Not when you were fighting men with lawyers. He was quiet for a moment, then, softly, you said crying doesn't make people weak. Does being scared? Her heart cracked in her chest. She turned toward the window, her free hand covering her mouth. No, she whispered. Being scared means you still care. It means you're still human. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the static hum of the line, like the world holding its breath for them. Then she asked gently, Where's the file now? Hidden, in my closet, under the floor panel. Good boy, she murmured. Keep it there. Don't touch it until I say so. Will you tell the police? She hesitated. If I do, your father will know it came from inside the house. He'll blame you. He looked at the closed door, listening for footsteps. Maybe he should. Don't you ever say that. Her tone was sharp now, motherly. Your father may be many things, but he's still your father. He said nothing. His throat felt tight. Maria softened her voice. Ethan, I want you to promise me something. What? If things get strange at home, if anyone asks questions, don't lie, but don't tell everything either. Keep yourself safe first. Can you do that? He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Okay. Good, her voice cracked. And Ethan? Yeah? I'm proud of you. You did something very brave. He smiled faintly. You always said truth makes people brave. And it does, she whispered. But remember, truth can also make people angry, especially those who built their lives on lies. Suddenly, a knock at his door made him jump. Ethan! It was Cole's voice. Ethan's heart raced. I have to go, he whispered quickly. Maria's tone changed instantly. Hide the file now. Delete this call history. Promise me. I promise. The door handle twisted slightly. Coming, Ethan called. He ended the call, shoved the tablet under his pillow, and opened the door. Cole stood there, smiling that fake polite smile that never reached his eyes. What are you up to, young master? Homework, Ethan said quickly. Math? Cole's eyes flicked toward the tablet. You're awfully secretive lately. I just like quiet, Ethan said, forcing a shrug. Cole studied him for a long second, then nodded. Your father wants you in the study later. Don't be late. Yes, Mr. Cole. When the door finally closed, Ethan sank against it, breathing hard. His chest ached from holding everything inside. He looked at the window, rain starting again, faint but steady, and whispered, I won't let them erase her. Across town, Maria sat at her kitchen table, still holding the phone long after the call ended. Her tea had gone cold. She stared at the cracked screen, at the boy's name glowing faintly. Her eyes welled up again, but this time there was a fire behind them. The file existed. Her husband's truth existed. And a 9-year-old boy, trapped in a house of lies, had found the courage to reveal it. She whispered into the empty room, "Hang on, Ethan, I'm coming for both of us." The Devereux mansion woke to thunder again, not from the sky this time, but from the sound of Edward's rage shaking its marble bones. "Who accessed my office?" his voice bellowed through the corridors. Doors cracked open, maids flinched, the staff exchanged terrified glances. Even Cole, for once, looked uneasy. It was just after breakfast when Edward discovered it, the missing folder. The desk drawer had been left slightly open, something he never allowed. Inside, where the Alvarez file had been, lay nothing but a faint outline in the dust and one fallen ribbon. He tore through the drawers, scattering papers across the floor. His pulse thundered. That file wasn't just a record. It was a buried sin, one he thought he'd sealed away forever. "Cole!" he roared. The butler appeared instantly, bowing his head. "Sir?" "The Alvarez documents, gone. I want to know who's been in this room. Check the security feed, now." Cole's face drained of color. "Yes, sir." Edward sank into his chair, gripping the arms until his knuckles went white. He stared at his reflection in the glass cabinet, a powerful man unraveling. His wife's portrait hung above the fireplace, her painted eyes calm and knowing. He turned away, muttering, "Don't look at me like that." By afternoon, Cole returned, hands trembling slightly as he held a printed still image from the security feed. Edward snatched it from him, his breath catching mid-snarl. There, grainy but unmistakable, was a small figure entering the study past midnight, barefoot, hoodie, flashlight in hand. Ethan. The world went silent for a full 3 seconds. Then, slowly, Edward whispered, "My son." He slammed the photo onto the desk. "Get him." Ethan sat in his room, trying to act normal, tracing doodles in his math notebook, but his stomach twisted in knots. He'd seen Cole whispering to the guards. He knew something was coming. The door burst open before he could hide his backpack. His father filled the doorway, tall, furious, eyes sharp as broken glass. "Where is it?" Ethan froze. "What?" "The file." He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Edward strode across the room, grabbed the backpack and yanked it open. The file slid out, spilling across the floor. Pages fluttered like ghosts set free. He stared down at them, then up at his son, shock and betrayal crossing his face. "You broke into my office?" "You lied," Ethan shouted back, his voice cracking. "You said she stole from us, but you're the one who—" "Enough!" Edward's voice thundered, but Ethan didn't stop. He was shaking, tears burning in his eyes. "You fired her because you didn't want anyone to find out what you did to her husband. It says your name, right there. You made it all go away." Edward stepped forward, his anger collapsing into something darker, shame. His eyes flicked to the papers on the floor. The words "compensation withheld" stared back at him like a scar. He'd signed it years ago. His wife had begged him not to. He saw her handwriting on the margin again, faint but still legible. "Edward, these are people, not numbers." His knees almost gave out. Cole appeared in the doorway, uncertain. "Sir, shall I—" Edward's voice was low, cold. "Leave us." When they were alone, the thunder outside matched the one inside him. He knelt, picking up one of the papers. His hands trembled. "Ethan," he said quietly, "where did you find this?" "In your drawer," the boy said through tears. "You shouldn't hide truth." Edward swallowed hard. "You think you understand truth?" "I understand kindness," Ethan whispered. "And she was kind. You weren't." The words struck deeper than any blow could have. Edward sat heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at the boy who looked so much like Eleanor that it hurt. For the first time in years, he felt small. But pride, cold and ancient, rose to fill the silence. He gathered the papers, forcing steadiness into his voice. "You will never mention this again. Do you hear me?" Ethan shook his head. "I already did." Edward froze. "What do you mean?" "I told her," Ethan whispered. "Miss Maria, she knows." Edward's blood ran cold. "You—" "What?" "I called her." The man's face drained of color. He reached for the desk phone instantly, barking, "Cole, track her number, now!" But behind his fury, guilt was blooming, uncontrollable, unstoppable. The past he buried was rising. And for the first time, Edward Devereux wasn't the one in control. Maria didn't plan to go back to that mansion, not ever. But when she received Cole's unexpected message, Mr. Devereux requests your presence to resolve prior disputes. She knew exactly what it meant. He'd found out. She could have ignored it, could have run. But she thought of Ethan, trapped inside that cold palace, facing the wrath of a man who thought power was the same as being right. She dressed carefully that morning, not out of vanity, but out of dignity. A clean white blouse, her only blazer, the locket Miguel gave her the day he proposed. If she was going to be destroyed again, she'd at least look like someone worth remembering. When she arrived, the gates creaked open slowly. 2 guards escorted her inside. The marble foyer was exactly as she remembered it, perfect, polished, heartless. Edward stood at the foot of the staircase, hands clasped behind his back, his posture as rigid as his expression. "Miss Alvarez," he said coolly, "you've caused quite a stir." "I only wanted the truth," she replied softly. "By manipulating my son?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Your son saw what you refused to." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You have no idea what you've done." She smiled faintly. "No, Mr. Devereux, I think I finally do." Before he could respond, small footsteps echoed down the stairs. Ethan appeared, his hair disheveled, eyes red from crying. "Dad, stop," he said firmly. Edward turned sharply. "Back to your room." "No," the boy said, voice trembling but unyielding. "You can't lie anymore." He walked past his father and stood beside Maria. His small hand slipped into hers. Edward's breath caught. The image was unbearable. His son standing beside the woman he'd destroyed, his dead wife's compassion reflected in both their faces. "Ethan," he said quietly, almost pleading, "this isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," the boy said. "You made it my fight when you made me live in your lies." The words struck him harder than any accusation could. Cole appeared with a folder, a fresh set of legal papers, his expression unreadable. "Sir, the auditors have arrived early. They're waiting in the library." Edward looked at him, then at Maria, then at his son. He felt the walls closing in. Maria spoke, her voice calm but heavy with truth. "You can keep pretending, Mr. Devereux, but the world will know. Those papers are proof, not just of Miguel's case, but of dozens of others." He stared at her. "You think I'll let you destroy me?" She held his gaze. "You already did that yourself." Silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan stepped forward and laid the Alvarez file at his father's feet. "I found the truth," he said softly, "and it made me sad for you." Edward's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked down at the folder, the one thing he'd spent years trying to bury, now lying open at his feet, held accountable by the smallest hands in the room. He turned away, his voice breaking. "Leave us." Maria shook her head. "No more running, Edward. If you ever loved that boy or your wife, you'll face what you did." Something inside him snapped. Years of denial, pride, grief, all crumbling at once. He stumbled to the nearest chair, collapsing into it. For a long time, the only sound in the room was his ragged breathing. Finally, he whispered, "She begged me to do right. Your husband's death was an accident, but the cover-up wasn't. I was afraid of what it would cost me." Maria closed her eyes, tears falling quietly. "It cost you your soul." Ethan climbed onto the arm of his father's chair, resting his small hand on his shoulder. "You can fix it, Dad, but only if you stop lying." Edward looked up at him, at those innocent eyes that saw straight through his empire of pretense, and for the first time in years, he nodded. By nightfall, the auditors had everything. Cole resigned before dawn. The story spread faster than the family could contain it. Fraud, withheld compensation, buried claims. But in the middle of the chaos, something fragile and real happened. Edward Devereux, the man who'd built a world out of silence, finally told the truth. He signed restitution papers for every victim he'd denied, and when he handed Maria her file, his voice trembled. "I can't give you back what I took," he said quietly, "but I can start by saying I'm sorry." Maria took the file slowly. Her eyes softened, though her voice stayed strong. "Justice isn't revenge, Mr. Devereux. It's remembrance. You remember the people you tried to forget." Ethan watched the two of them, the man learning humility, the woman reclaiming her dignity, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. By morning, the Devereux estate was no longer quiet. The gates that had once only opened for limousines and dignitaries now groaned beneath the weight of flashing cameras. Reporters lined the driveway like wolves, microphones extended toward the front steps. The whispers had finally found their way into headlines. Billionaire Edward Devereux accused of insurance fraud and employee exploitation. Whistleblower evidence exposes decade of suppressed claims. The mansion that once represented perfection now stood under a storm of its own making. Inside, the staff packed their belongings in silence. Some cried, others simply moved like ghosts, knowing their jobs were finished the moment truth crossed the threshold. Ethan watched from the upstairs window, his small fingers pressed against the cold glass. He'd expected to feel triumphant, but all he felt was tired. Below, his father stood on the front steps beside a lawyer, surrounded by flashes of white light. His once unshakable posture now sagged slightly, like the truth had added invisible weight to his shoulders. Maria didn't come that day. She didn't need to. Her truth was already walking through every hallway, written across every newspaper. She sat at home with Lucia, watching the broadcast. On the screen, Edward Devereux's voice sounded distant, rehearsed. "These allegations are being reviewed internally. We will cooperate fully with authorities." Lucia frowned. "Isn't that Ethan's dad?" Maria nodded slowly. "Yes." "Is he going to jail?" Maria hesitated. "Maybe not. But he'll never be free until he makes things right." Lucia thought for a moment, then whispered, "You're not mad at him?" Maria looked at the screen again, at the man who'd stolen years from her and her husband's memory, and answered softly, "Anger eats the one who holds it. I'd rather hold peace." By evening, the company board had demanded Edward's resignation. The media called it a fall from grace, but Ethan didn't think Grace had ever really lived in his father's house. When the cameras left, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. This one was honest, heavy, cleansing. Edward stood in his study, the same room that had once locked away the truth, and stared at the portrait of his wife. He whispered quietly, "You were right, Eleanor. They were people, not numbers." He turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway. The boy had his backpack on, holding a folded paper. "Where are you going?" Edward asked softly. "School," Ethan said. "Maria's coming to pick me up." Edward's eyes widened. "You're still speaking to her?" "She's my friend," Ethan said simply. "And you said truth matters now." The man swallowed. "Yes," he said, almost to himself. "It does." Ethan hesitated, then added, "She said you can fix things if you want to, but not by hiding." Edward's lips parted, but no defense came. The boy's words were too close to Eleanor's, too precise, too pure. When Ethan left, Edward sat at the desk and looked at the file one last time. He didn't destroy it. He didn't lock it away. He placed it in a box labeled restitution documents and sealed it with his signature. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. That night he walked through the empty halls and paused outside his late wife's piano room. Dust shimmered in the low light. He lifted the silk cover, sat down, and pressed a single key. It rang out clear and lonely. For a moment, Edward Devereux, the man who had built an empire of silence, let himself grieve the sound of his own humanity returning. 3 days later, a courier arrived at Maria's apartment. Inside the envelope was a formal letter stamped with the Devereux family crest. She almost didn't open it. For 10 years, every letter from that family had carried pain. But this one was different. The paper was thick, heavy, and the handwriting wasn't typed. It was his. "Miss Alvarez, I owe you a decade of apologies and a lifetime of gratitude I can never repay. I once believed silence was safety, that power could cover the cracks of conscience. I see now it only deepened them. I've instructed the Devereux Corporation to compensate every affected employee, beginning with your late husband's case. Your daughter's scholarship will be reinstated in full under a new foundation in his name. The media will demand my words, but they don't deserve your story. It's yours now, untouched, unedited, unowned. If forgiveness is impossible, I will accept that. But know this, I see you now. Edward Devereux." Maria sat frozen, the words blurring behind tears. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding her anger until it started to loosen its grip. Lucia peeked over her shoulder. "Who's it from?" Maria smiled faintly through the tears. "Someone who finally learned to say sorry." That afternoon, another envelope arrived, smaller, written in a child's handwriting. Inside was a folded drawing, two stick figures under a big yellow sun, just like the one from her old room. At the bottom, "Me and Miss Maria. Truth wins." And beneath it, in careful letters, "Love, Ethan." She pressed the paper to her heart, whispering, "Oh, sweetheart." Then she took out a blank sheet and began to write back. "Dear Ethan, you were the bravest person in that house. Don't let anyone make you feel smaller for it. Truth isn't loud, it's steady like a heartbeat. And one day, your father will thank you for saving him from himself. Be kind, but never blind. Speak softly, but never in fear. You didn't just save me. You reminded me why I kept believing in good people. Love, Miss Maria." She folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote the return address of the Devereaux estate. Then she sat for a long moment, watching sunlight spill across the paper. The storm was over. Not forgotten, but finally behind her. Later that week, Edward read Maria's reply in his study. For the first time, he didn't hide it. He left it open on the desk where anyone could see. Ethan stood beside him, reading quietly. When he finished, he looked up. "Does this mean everything's okay now?" Edward smiled faintly. "No," he said softly. "It means we can start trying." He reached out, resting his hand gently on his son's shoulder. "You did what I couldn't, Ethan. You told the truth." Ethan looked at the open window, sunlight washing over the curtains. "Miss Maria says truth is like light. It gets in even when you close all the doors." Edward nodded, voice trembling. "Then maybe it's time to open them all." That evening, father and son walked through the mansion together, room by room, turning on every light. They stopped at the piano last. Ethan lifted the cover and touched one key. The sound filled the air, no longer haunting but clear, alive. Edward smiled, tears in his eyes. "Your mother loved that song." Ethan looked up. "Maybe you should play it for her again." And for the first time in years, the mansion didn't echo. It sang. Outside, across town, Maria watched the news again. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Devereaux Corporation establishes foundation for worker safety in memory of Miguel Alvarez." She whispered to herself, "Finally." Then she turned off the TV, stepped out onto the small balcony, and looked up at the clear night sky. There were no more storms, just stars, distant, but shining all the same. 6 months later, the Devereaux estate no longer looked like the same place. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still shimmered. But the air was different now, warmer, real. Laughter echoed down the hallways again. Quiet, hesitant at first, but human. The newspapers had moved on to fresher scandals. The headlines that once screamed about fraud and betrayal were now replaced by new stories, new names. But for those who still remembered, one headline remained etched in the public memory. "Former billionaire admits cover-up, turns fortune toward justice." Edward Devereaux was no longer the man who hid behind marble and glass. He had resigned from his company, liquidated his private accounts, and built something new, something his late wife would have approved of. The Devereaux Foundation for Worker Safety stood in the heart of the city now, a modest building of white stone and open windows. Its walls weren't meant to impress, they were meant to invite. Inside the front lobby, displayed under protective glass, was the document that had begun it all, the Alvarez file, the one his son had risked everything to uncover, the one Maria had nearly lost everything to protect. Underneath it, a small plaque read, "Truth is never a threat to the innocent." Every person who entered the foundation passed it first. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, Edward would stand before it, hands behind his back, head bowed, not as a businessman, but as a penitent man. Maria joined the foundation as a senior advisor, overseeing outreach for families affected by workplace injustice. She was hesitant at first, unsure if she could ever work under the Devereaux name again. But when Ethan came to her personally, holding her letter from months ago, she'd said yes. Not for Edward, for the boy who'd believed her when no one else did. He visited often, usually on weekends. He'd sit at her office desk, coloring or helping Lucia with her homework. The two children had become inseparable. Lucia once joked, "You're famous, Ethan. My classmates say you're a real-life detective." He smiled shyly. "I'm not. I just listened." Maria overheard, smiling from her desk. "That's how truth begins, sweetheart. With someone who listens." Edward entered the office later that day, older but lighter. His eyes softened when he saw the two children laughing together. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an intruder in his own world. He turned to Maria. "They remind me of Eleanor and me once," he said quietly. She glanced up, still working. "Before money spoke louder than love?" He sighed. "Yes." Maria folded her papers neatly. "Then teach him differently. Don't let him grow up thinking silence is strength." Edward nodded. "He already taught me that lesson." That afternoon, a press conference marked the official launch of the Foundation's scholarship program. The hall was filled with reporters, families, and former employees who had once cursed Edward's name. He stepped up to the podium, the Alvarez file displayed behind him. "I used to think legacy was built in numbers and skyscrapers," he began, voice trembling slightly. "But real legacy is built in the people we fail and how we choose to make it right." He looked at Maria in the front row. She nodded once, firmly, proudly. Then he turned to his son, sitting beside her. "This foundation began because one child dared to tell the truth his father wouldn't. I hope every child here grows up with that same courage." Ethan blushed as applause filled the hall. And just like that, the Devereaux name, once drenched in scandal, began to mean something different. That evening, Maria stayed behind after the event. She walked up to the Alvarez file one more time. The ink was faded, but the truth was permanent. She whispered softly, "You can rest now, Miguel. We won." Behind her, Edward approached quietly. "Thank you for coming back," he said. "I didn't come back," she said, turning toward him. "I came forward." He smiled faintly. "You always did walk ahead of the rest of us." And for once, they both laughed. Outside, the sunset reflected off the building's glass like fire and gold. The world hadn't forgotten their story. It had simply rewritten it. Section 12. The Boy Who Saw the Truth. Approximately 900 words. Emotional closure, generational healing, poetic ending for YouTube storytelling finale. 7 years later. The world had changed again. So had the boy who once hid behind stair railings and whispered secrets through a tablet screen. Ethan Devereaux, now 16, stood on a stage dressed in a navy suit that almost didn't fit him. His voice had deepened, but the earnestness in his eyes hadn't faded. The auditorium was filled with parents, students, and journalists. The banner above him read, "Annual Devereaux Foundation Scholarship Gala, in memory of Eleanor and Miguel." Maria sat in the front row beside Lucia, who was now a university student, radiant in her scholarship sash. Edward sat a few seats away, his hair gray, his expression soft, less like a mogul, more like a father. Ethan stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and began his speech. "When I was 9 years old," he said, "I found a secret file that wasn't mine." Laughter rippled softly through the audience, but he smiled faintly and continued. "I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew someone I loved had been hurt by a lie, and I thought maybe I could fix it. I didn't realize then how much truth can change everything." He paused, eyes flicking toward Maria. "I learned that courage doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being honest, even when you're scared." He looked at his father next. "I also learned that people can change, even the ones who've done terrible things. Because change isn't about erasing the past. It's about facing it." Edward's eyes shimmered. He bowed his head slightly, pride and regret blending quietly on his face. Ethan continued, his voice strong now. "This foundation isn't about money. It's about memory. Every worker we help, every family we reach. That's proof that truth outlives lies." Applause erupted through the hall. Maria clapped through tears, her hand over her heart. After the event, outside in the courtyard where lanterns glowed in the warm evening air, Maria found Ethan near the fountain. He was quiet, hands in his pockets, staring at the reflection of the lights on the water. "You were incredible up there," she said softly. He smiled. "I just told the truth." "That's exactly what incredible is," she replied. He chuckled. "Miss Maria, do you ever miss the mansion?" She tilted her head. Sometimes. But not the walls, just the boy who used to run through them. He grinned, shy again for a moment. You saved me, you know. No, she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You saved yourself. I just made sure you didn't lose your light along the way. Edward joined them a few minutes later, walking slower now, but smiling easier. He looked at the two of them, his son and the woman who'd changed both their fates, and said quietly, Eleanor would have been proud. Maria nodded. So would Miguel. They stood together, not as enemies or strangers, but as survivors of the same truth. Edward looked up at the night sky, stars winking faintly above. Do you think forgiveness is real, Maria? She smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't something you receive, Mr. Devereaux. It's something you practice every day you choose not to run from who you were. He nodded, eyes moist. Then I'll keep practicing. Later that night, Maria walked home with Lucia, who teased her gently. You still call him Mr. Devereaux? Maria laughed. Some habits die slower than guilt. They reached their apartment building just as the first drops of summer rain began to fall. She looked up at the sky and whispered, You were right, Ethan. Truth really does get in, even when the doors are closed. Across town, in the now renovated mansion, Ethan stood by the piano, the same one where his father's guilt had once been hidden. He ran his fingers across the keys and began to play the melody his mother used to love, the one his father had finished years ago with trembling hands. Edward watched from the doorway, silent, tears streaming freely. The house, once cursed by silence, was now filled with sound again, gentle, pure, alive. When Ethan finished, he turned and smiled. Good night, Dad, Edward whispered. Good night, son. Voiceover-style closing lines for YouTube outro. They say the truth can destroy everything, but sometimes it doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. A maid lost her name, a man lost his empire, and a boy found the courage to give them both back something greater, their humanity. Fade out on the final shot. The Alvarez file framed in glass, sunlight streaming through it as the words glow softly. Truth is never a threat to the innocent.